Jake, I got a question for you. Have you ever been on a team with a really toxic team member?
Ooh, I don't think so. I mean, I've had team members who I didn't love, but I don't think I've ever been part of a team where there was somebody on it who was truly toxic.
Okay, well then let me ask you this a different way. Have you ever heard the one-liner, if you're looking around the room and you can't spot the toxic team member, it might be you?
Wait a minute. Am I getting fired? Is this how you're... Is that the preamble to you fire? Can you even fire me? I don't think you can fire me. Can you fire me?
No, it's actually really hard to fire you because,
Yes.
HR policies and employment law.
That is why I moved here to France, just for the sake of recording this podcast so that you can't fire me. It was an expensive proposition, but as proving right now, well worth it.
I think it's paying off for you.
Yeah. I knew somebody actually who had a bunch of employees located in Paris and had someone who was so toxic, and because of employment law, their literal plan was to transfer the person to one of the New York offices and then fire them a month later because it was so much easier at that point. Like it's that hard in France to fire an underperforming employee. I think you literally get named king of the country before they are allowed to fire you. You cannot get rid of employees in France.
Wow.
All right. I'm Jake.
And I'm Kate.
We're friends, organizational psychologists, and the new co-directors of the Department of Government Efficiency, because you need to. We have a really interesting listener question in this episode.
Yeah, we have a letter from Lisa. She's 44 years old. She's actually the CMO at a manufacturing company. So,
Chief Money Officer.
Chief Marketing Officer at a manufacturing company.
Is that what the M stands for? I've been getting this wrong a lot. That explains a lot of bad conversations I've had.
So she wrote in the following. I took over a small marketing department about 15 months ago, and I knew it wasn't going to be a cakewalk, but most of the team turned out to be pretty receptive. I was able to hire some new folks, but one of my hires turned out to be extremely toxic. He interviewed exceptionally well and started strong, but after a few months, he started to blame people and complain about everything. He said the work was below his pay grade. Every missed deliverable came with a host of justifications, and around month 7, I put some concrete performance improvement plans for him in place, which he couldn't execute on. Eventually, he resigned, but we actually had to accelerate his termination because we discovered he stole some of our IP. After he left, he started a campaign to undermine me, doing unhinged stuff like texting people on my team, telling them to be careful with me. The whole experience drained me, and my team is still recovering. I want to restore a more positive culture with my team and make sure I don't make the same mistake again.
Gosh, what a nightmare. What a nightmare. You bring in this guy who seems like he should be terrific. Just a couple months in, you've hired a complete, I don't even know what to call him. What should we call this guy? First of all, let's take a guess at what his name is.
I was thinking Mr. T, only because
That's my last name?
I feel like because he's got a chip on his shoulder.
Oh, literally like Mr. T from Rocky 3 is what you're talking about. Have you ever seen Rocky 3?
No.
Yeah.
No, I've seen more A-Team. I've seen a lot of the A-Team.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
And I think Mr. T, I think he's a standout. And personally, I actually really dig him.
I feel like his name is Nate. His name is Nathan. His last name is actually, if you were to write it out, it would be Nathan Asshole, but it's pronounced Tasholi. It's Nate
It's Asholi.
Nate Asholi.
Yeah.
Clearly, this is a guy who gives off Nate vibes, but insists you call him Nathan. You're like, oh, it's Nathan Asholi on the resume. And then you look at it and you're like, hey, Nate. And he's like, it's Nathan. And you're like, okay.
Can you guys just call me Nathan?
You just call me Nathan.
He prefers Nathan.
I'm actually really worried about Lisa in this situation, and I want to help her out.
Yeah.
In order for us to do that here, we needed more info from her as usual. So we followed up with 3 good questions we came up with, and luckily for our benefit, she gave us 3 helpful answers.
So the first question we sent Lisa was actually a timeline question. We kind of wanted to understand a little bit more about this team timeline. or the age of the team.
Team line. The team line.
The team line. So we asked, how long was your team together before the toxic member exited? And this is what she said. My team was together for 3 months. Then we hired him, and he was there for just over a year.
That's not a lot of time to be in place together before this guy shows up on the scene. They don't have some history. So, yeah, I can imagine why everything feels like it was in flux now. It's because it never had a time to really gel beforehand.
Yeah, 100%. The word gel is exactly what I was thinking about when I read 3 months. 3 months is basically an onboarding period for an individual. It's really not a lot of time for a team to come together.
And you mentioned gelling. I have a feeling that Nathan uses a lot of hair gel. I'm just throwing that out there. Just a thought. Just a thought.
Okay, so we asked a second question of Lisa, and this was also a team question. What kind of conversations were you having with your team members about team culture and dynamics before the toxic team member exited? And she said, as a team, we had several conversations about kindness, resourcefulness, and ownership. It was my way of showing my team members who were most impacted by his negativity that I knew what was going on, and it seemed to land with everybody but him. I also had several one-on-ones with him, provided increasingly specific feedback because I did believe in his skill set and expertise as a marketer, and I really wanted him to succeed.
This sounds to me like Lisa handled it pretty darn well. I mean, there's probably some core textbook performance management things that if we had more detail, we might touch on. But for a small marketing team, just in the real world, it sounds like she did a pretty good job. She did the thing we've seen leaders do where you don't want to single anyone out, so you bring everyone in for a conversation about team morale and kindness and respectfulness, and it's really all there for one person's benefit, but you do it with everybody so they don't feel singled out. And of course, that person doesn't walk away with any learning whatsoever.
The thing that struck me about this response from Lisa was she did actually go from sort of team level group, sort of shared responsibility conversations, and also move to a performance plan. So kudos to Lisa. The other thing I'm going to say on the flip side, though, is bias of self-report. So we'll get into this a little bit more in terms of what else might have been going on. But I think that the A-B approach of talk with the team and talk to the individual sounds pretty sound to me.
Assuming we can trust everything Lisa is saying here, I'm pretty impressed with the way she handled it, which makes me think that the big turn in this episode is that actually Lisa was the murderer the whole time. It was her. She did it. Nate's dead and Lisa did it.
She did it in the office supply room with a stapler?
With a stapler.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds like Lisa.
Yep. We actually asked her third question, how did you hope things would be after he left? And the reason we asked this question is we wanted to kind of look forward with Lisa and understand what she was hoping would become of her team after the termination. So we asked, how did you hope things would be after he left? And here's what Lisa said. We are a small team, so there were loose ends and unfinished projects we needed to pick up. So we sort of just drove right into that because we had to. And I guess what I was hoping for was that my team would just move on and work better without him. But I don't think everyone's quite there yet. Something isn't right.
So the guy leaves. There's a bit of a sigh of relief, and everyone just dives right into the work and doesn't address the elephant that is not even anymore in the room. It's the elephant that's left the room, but we still don't address it. There's no elephant talk whatsoever.
It's the scent of the elephant, maybe, is still in the room.
Yes.
But not the elephant itself.
Nate probably, yes, between the hair gel and some of the other things he's probably into supplementation-wise, probably has an elephant stench that I think needs to have left the room. And it's there. It's still wafting its way in. It lingers. So we have our marching orders today, which is to try to help Lisa make this a more positive culture, number one. Number two, how to maybe avoid having this happen again. Let's talk a little bit about what we see as going on here.
I just want to kick things off with a small aside. I do want to acknowledge the creep of the word toxic into our lexicon. I mean, kudos to Britney Spears.
I was going to say,
talking 2003?
Every time somebody has a toxic employee and they mention it in the workplace, she gets royalties for that.
She and her albino boa are probably doing really well because the word toxic has crept into virtual relationships, actual relationships, and definitely the workplace conversations in terms of the way we talk about people, other people and employees. And I think that it's sort of a slippery slope. I think it's a little bit problematic to label someone toxic. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. There's like a psychiatrist named Dr. Samantha Boardman who
Dr.
recently started.
Britney Spears.
Dr. B. Spears.
Dr. Spears.
And no, but that the label toxic might be easy and popular and familiar for a lot of people to utilize and wield, but I don't actually think it's all that helpful for someone in a leadership position or their team to use it because it's so nonspecific. That's my hang up. But I think the more that a leader can get really specific about the behaviors they want to see and the behaviors that they don't want to see and hold the line firmly, that is a lot more effective than labeling someone as toxic and then saying like, okay, they were toxic and now they're gone.
Toxic is a feeling. It's a feeling, right? Oh,
Yeah.
This person, they're bringing so much toxicity to the situation. They're a toxic member of the team. But you have to unpack that if you're ever going to figure out exactly what it is you want them to correct, or let alone what you want to ideally hope to avoid. It's too vague.
I think if Lisa's objective is a positive team culture, getting really specific about the kinds of behaviors that bring people closer together and talking about those rather than being vague about the behaviors that sort of drive people apart. I would say toxic, poisonous, whatever is one of those sort of drive people apart words. But positive team culture really is about being in more relationship rather than sort of like pushing someone out.
I did hear somebody use a toxic related phrase the other day that I loved because I agree, like labeling an employee toxic is not that useful, but there's been a lot of great phrases that have entered the vernacular lately. Toxic masculinity, right? You've heard all these phrases.
Oh, yeah.
I heard somebody describe something the other day as toxic positivity, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it. I hadn't heard that before. What a great phrase.
I've heard it, and I think it's like spot on. I mean,
Spot
how
on.
many of us have had an experience with a manager or a boss or someone in our organizational context who just comes in and thinks that being a cheerleader is sufficient? It actually gets a strong negative blowback when people find that excessively positive sort of fake presentation. Teams hate that. Employees hate that.
There's another observation I had in thinking through Lisa's situation that I do think from an organizational psychology lens is important for us to bring up and at least kick around. And that is my question as to what extent, if any, Nathan was really a convenient scapegoat for what the team was experiencing.
It's a really good question to ask. It's like it's necessary to look at.
To answer it, though, I feel like I got to take us to the ivory tower. Can I take us there?
Oh, I won't even hear your words unless you're dressed appropriately.
All right, give me a minute. Let me go get my blazer. Hold on a second.
Ooh, Jake. Is that tweed? Just tell me it has elbow patches.
This one didn't come with elbow patches. I've got to get them. I need a pipe also. I don't have a pipe. Let me take us to the ivory tower. Let's talk a little bit about scapegoating.
Yep.
The term scapegoating has ancient origins, biblical even, I believe. There's stories that go back as far as the Bible. I think it was Leviticus, wherein members of different villages or groups would take all of the sins and sort of literally cast them onto a goat or an animal that was then said to be carrying them, and that goat would be led out of the village, and with that, all of the sins would disappear. That's the origin, the etymology of the idea. To cut to the chase a little bit, scapegoating tends to be a phenomenon that arises in a group when the group members are all experiencing some sort of unconsciously driven anxiety or fear. And rather than in a mature way just address that and deal with it, the group members essentially try to find a target for all that anxiety to project it onto. And it usually winds up being one person in the group that, in psychological terms, is the recipient of all of that unconscious projection, and everybody points to this person and says, they're the problem, they're the issue, they're the one who's incompetent, they're the one who's not a good communicator. And what tends to happen in groups is the group forces them to leave. After that, there's this moment of catharsis, like, yeah, we got the bad juju out of the room, the vibes are going to be better now. The difference is that when a scapegoating situation occurs, the problem is still going to find its way back into the group because it really didn't leave with that one person. Just like in the silliness of the story where you cast your sins onto the goat and the goat is led out of the village, your sins are still there, right? You didn't actually remove anything physically from the room when you removed a person physically from the group. And then pretty quickly usually goes south again. And somebody else is often made a scapegoat or the group implodes in different reasons. But I wonder, and this is a question I would ask to Lisa, Are those vibes still floating around the same way in the group, or did they really leave with Nathan? Now, my intuition is that this is probably not a scapegoating situation, but it's a question I think you and I, from our perspective, need to ask.
Yeah, we recognize this dynamic when we look at other people's situations, but we are very poor at identifying when we are participating in them. And so hence your question of like, I think we would need to talk to Lisa about this a little bit more is like, is it possible that your team was somehow participating in the creation of a scapegoat?
I don't think my intuition, if you ask me to bet, is not that this is a scapegoating situation. It is that Nathan, again, if that is his real name, Nathan is the problem here. And it's
definitely not his real name. We made it up.
No, it's not. We did make it up. Nathan, if you're listening, I'm sorry. All right. Am I allowed to leave the ivory tower now? Because I'm extremely hot in this blazer. Do I have your permission to step aside and take it off? Okay, I'll be right back. Let's come to this.
Yeah.
Yep. We do this podcast to help our listeners reach their potential at work. Our sponsor today, Inside Tracker, helps you achieve your goals at the office and at home. Whether you're training for the next Olympics or just trying to survive long enough to watch them on TV, Inside Tracker helps you feel stronger and live longer by designing a health plan exclusively for you, all through a simple blood test. I love Inside Tracker. I've been using it for years. It gives me the personalized information I need to make smarter choices about my diet and make sure my sleep and exercise are in balance so I can show up smarter tomorrow. Inside Tracker is giving Forces at Work listeners 25% off. All you have to do is go to insidetracker.com and use the code FORCESATWORK at checkout. That's insidetracker.com and use code FORCESATWORK. Something else that is going on here that we don't have a lot of data about with respect to Lisa is exactly what was done during the hiring process that Nathan clearly excelled at. I mean, we know he interviewed exceptionally well, but when I hear that, it's actually a bit of a red flag for me because I worry that way too many organizations rely on how does the person feel when they interview? Do they feel like they'd be part of the team? What does it feel like? This idea of fit is very loose. And I just think that there's a lot of things organizations can and should do that would be much more scientific, for lack of a better term, in terms of getting people in the door. And I think the first thing that you want to do is just look the person in the eye and say, are you a psychopath?
Definitely. I've seen it work really well over and over again. But you know where it works better?
Go.
It actually works better when you ask it a couple of times. I think we know this as coaches, right? You don't ask a question once and accept the first response because I think time will tell that, an individual who says, no, I am not a psychopath at the outset.
Classic psychopath.
Classic psychopath.
Listen, I will say this. If you ask somebody, are you a psychopath? And they look at you and move only the muscles on their lips and mouth and say, yes, I am a psychopath.
Then you got to give them points for self-awareness.
Yeah, you just hire them right off the way because EQ like that's not easy to find on the street.
Well, at least they're honest.
All right, well, can you manage it, right? Can you keep it in check for us? Yeah.
Show me your portfolio.
Let's see what kind of work you've done. Amazing track record. Speaks for itself. Yeah.
My impression, we think we've come a long way incorporating behavioral questions into interviews. That is now standard practice. However, if someone is already doing that, and we know it's not perfect, and they're seeing work products,
it's so not perfect.
They're calling references. I think where we could add some additional, some sprinkles on the top that actually is data rooted in validated tools, and not all assessments are created equal.
I'm a big fan of Enneagram. Oh yeah. Give me some Enneagram. Tell me you're a spiritual advisor, truster, nurturer, Sagittarius, whatever. Oh my God. If one more person mentions
popular and easy to engage with, not actually rooted in a scientific process in terms of truly assessing tendencies or personality traits.
Yeah, no, there's stuff that's much better than the Myers-Briggs disc stuff out there. Stuff you and I love, like the Hogan assessments or the OPQ 32R. Just to get a little nerdy here for the folks at home who are playing assessment roulette with their bingo cards.
Literally, no one plays that.
No, nobody's. That makes me think we should talk a little bit about what advice we'd give Lisa. We talked about what's been going on here. We've talked about, in general, this labeling of toxic as a broad constraint because it's a broad concept.
Slippery slope, definitely to be avoided. for sure.
We've talked about scapegoating, how it happens, and making sure that's not what's going on here. We talked about this idea of augmenting your hiring process to move away from interviewing. So let's give Lisa some actual advice. I mean, her
Yep.
driving question for us was twofold. It was, how do I restore a positive team culture? And how do I make sure this doesn't happen again? I think we should tackle the last part first,
Definitely.
how to make sure this doesn't happen again, because we've just segued to it from our conversation on evaluating people before they get to the team.
Yep. I would put money on the fact that everybody on the team, including Lisa, are going to be a little bit skittish for their next hire as a result of this experience. So starting here is probably the most useful.
I would say there's a couple of personality-driven assessments, psychometrics, that could be really useful to have an expert come and deploy. I would also probably think about redoing the way you do reference checks. A lot of people make that a very check-the-box exercise, or at minimum, don't get as much detail out of reference checks as you can get. When I do executive search, I have a process I call deep reference, which is very thorough. It involves giving the candidates a self-report assessment and actually giving their references a sort of 180 version of that, and then asking their references about that and going deep and talking a little bit about the experiences they had together in ways that are really revealing, both in terms of what the other people think of the candidate, as well as the candidate's level of self-awareness.
Yeah. And actually, this could end up being, when we think about an assessment being added to a screening and hiring process, maybe also sharing it across a team. In Lisa's case, her team, of like, what are the strengths and blind spots of the team that I have? And not just at the point of hiring, but to prevent maybe even some of the simmering tension that led to this all falling apart, which is sort of a culture topic.
Well, listen, just as an aside, there's a model for how this tends to get done really well that's really public that people know about, which is sports teams. You don't just draft any player usually. I mean, there are certain circumstances where you say, this person is just so talented that we have to fit the organization around them. Usually you're looking at available players and saying, given the strengths and weaknesses of our team and what we're trying to do to compete to win, what's going to be the best fit?
It's not just about like, who are we recruiting? Are we getting like the best of the best? Sometimes the best of the best can also disturb the balance of things.
How do you think Lisa should go about restoring positive culture, given that it clearly seems like everyone's still a bit wound up and frazzled, even though Nate, if that is his real name, is actually gone?
There's often quite a bit of chatter around, yes, positive workplace culture or a happier workplace or happy, that kind of thing. I just want to level set that like a happy team is not the goal.
Yes.
Right? Like a happy team is not necessarily a high functioning team. A high functioning team is a team that can actually like spar and continue to get work done at a high level. So this is not meant to sort of recommend that Lisa just strive for happiness or like a kumbaya team. The next hire still may be tough. But I would say from a positive team culture standpoint, I'd say interpersonal stability is really important, priority number one for a leader, after something that's been highly, highly disruptive and appears to have like lingering effects. I'd say part B is managing teamwork consistently. And that's resetting expectations around how work is getting distributed and how it's getting done.
100%. There tends to be this tendency when the team feels like it's in a rocky spot to really just focus on the team's emotional needs. And that's coming from a good place. The best way to often do that first, though, is to reaffirm roles, goals, responsibilities, how we're going to communicate, how we're going to structure work and get it done. Make everyone feel like they know where the swim lanes are. Don't just start swimming, which is sort of what they have done, right? They just kind of got back into the work. Define the swim lanes. Then let people start to swim. Then let's make sure we like being part of the swim team.
Swim team analogy. I think that's right. I agree. I heard that also in Lisa's story. There's another component too that I think is really important when I work with clients. And that's actually the last point I wanted to make. I think there is a tendency to talk about the employee even after they're gone. And my guidance around this generally would be,
don't talk about it, but put a picture of them on the wall. And every time somebody thinks that they're upset about something, just with a dart right there, right in the face.
Yeah, but I mean, it sort of sounds like a bumper sticker, right? I'd say like, stop talking about the employee as somehow this like toxic asset, or it was worse when they were here, or they did it like this and now we have to fix it. Stop talking about that, but don't stop talking. I think the active conversation about what the team is working on, why they're working on it, why they're refocusing, what they're going to change, all of that is part of restoring a positive culture.
There's been so much interesting stuff to unpack in this conversation, from you calling me a secretly toxic team member at the outset to Lisa's situation, to conversations about that concept of toxicity, scapegoating, hiring process, etc. But I think that's what we would really advise Lisa do, is to think a little bit about revamping the hiring process, using some professionals to bring a little bit more data driven, a little bit more thoroughness, so that she can feel comfortable that she's not going to be had in a way that gives her some confidence. And then really think about restoring a positive culture, not trying to just be a happy place, but by trying to think about managing work in a more consistent way and not breaking everything about what happened when Nathan was here, et cetera, and just really having forward-looking conversations about what you want out of this organization. Anything else to add?
No, I'm spent. I'm spent. I'm going to go listen to Britney Spears' album and lay on the floor.
That's what I do every night to go to bed. So see you in 5.
That's what I do every night. every night.
Every night.
The whole experience drained me, and my team is still recovering. I want to restore a more positive culture with my... Oh my God.
The idea of restoring a positive culture was so abhorrent to Kate that she just lost it. You were like, restore positive culture? That's fucking impossible. I'm just gonna, like, that literally, you choked on the impossibility of the impossible culture.
Holy shit.